Good evening. We're ready for Judges chapter 6, 7, 8, and 9, and I'll be reading from the ESV translation tonight. I want to call your attention to, and I didn't listen to Josh's lesson, but call your attention to the last verse of chapter 5, verse 31. In Deborah's song, she says at the end, "Let all your enemies perish, O Lord. Let those who love you be like the sun when it comes out in full strength." So the land had rest for 40 years. What's the significance of 40 years? Definitely a generation. Lots can happen in 40 years, can't there? That's right. So the land had rest for 40 years with Deborah. Quickly listed some things I want to read them to you. The word 40 is used and always signifies sin, judgment, and temptation. The land rested 40 years, as we just read, and that's several times in Judges. It rained 40 days and 40 nights before the flood. Moses on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. The spies spied out the land for 40 days. Moses fasted 40 days and 40 nights because of Israel's sin. Jehovah grieved 40 years for Israel's sin. Several kings reigned for 40 years. Nineveh was to be overthrown after 40 days. Jesus fasted 40 days and was tempted. Jesus appeared to his disciples after his resurrection for 40 days and then ascended. Just wanted to call your attention to the significance of 40 as we see it used here, especially in the book of Judges. Chapter 6 now, and verse 1, we see the oppression that it comes on Israel because of her evil, because of her sin. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. Why do you suppose 7 years is here mentioned? Anybody have a suggestion? You think the significance of 7 comes into play? The hand of Midian overpowered Israel, and because of Midian, the people of Israel made for themselves dens that are in the mountains and the caves of the strongholds. For whenever Israel planted crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east would come in against them. They would encamp against them, devour the produce of the land as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance in Israel, no sheep or oxen or donkey. For they would come in with their livestock and their tents. They would come like locusts in number. Both they and their camels could not be counted, so that they laid waste the land as they came in. And Israel was brought very low because of Midian. What do you think very low suggests? They will. And when they do, that's usually, there's no hope, is there? They have no hope, so they cried out to the Lord in the absence of their relationship with Him and having no hope. Then there's some reminders now in verse 7 beginning from the book of Exodus. And I'm continually amazed how often these two books go back to Exodus and remind the people what God had said to them, what God had promised, that what he was going to do with his people. And this is one of those. When the people of Israel cried out to the Lord on account of the Midianites, the Lord sent a prophet to the people of Israel. What is a prophet? Good. One who delivers God's message. He's actually a spokesman or a mouthpiece for God. Now, quite often we think of prophecy or of predictions, and that's true. But in this case, this prophet is being sent to the people for what purpose, do you think? All right. God always comes after us when we do things that we shouldn't. He tries to teach us. He tries to instruct us. He tries to woo us back to him. So he sends this prophet. And where do you suppose the prophet came from? What had Jehovah set up in Israel before or as he was sending the people in to take the land? What had he set up in Israel, in the land of Canaan? Both sides of the river, as well as several cities. Remember? The priests were to live in cities, have cities, not land. So these priests, among them were prophets. So there was access to prophets from all over Canaan at this time, and so the Lord sent one of those prophets to his people. And he said to them, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I led you up from Egypt, brought you out of the house of slavery. I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all who oppressed you. I drove them out from before you, gave you their land. And I said, I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear their gods, the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But you have not obeyed my voice." So this is what he said back in Exodus. This is what he said to his people all along. I will be with you. I will fight your battles for you. But you've not obeyed my voice. He's a patient God, isn't he? Peter says he's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. He wants us to have a relationship with him. Now, in verse 11, the angel of Jehovah, or the angel of the Lord, came and sat under a terebinth tree in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. See, this is one of the things they were doing in secret. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord Jehovah is with us, why then has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us the land of Midian." Kind of interesting that he would say that our fathers taught us. So many times in that 40-year span we were talking about, the generation goes down the tubes, and it has. But Gideon is one of those men who has heard these lessons. His parents obviously have been good to him in teaching him. But he knows that God has forsaken them and given them into the hands of the Midianites. Verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" He's trying to encourage Gideon to know, I'm with you. And he says that here 2 or 3 times. Go in this might, do not I send you? And he said, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you will strike the Midianites as one man. And he said to him, if now I have found favor in your eyes, then show me a sign that it is you who speak to me. Please do not depart from here until I come to you and bring out my present and set it before you. And he said, I will stay till you return. So now we see Gideon offering a sacrifice to the angel of the Lord. So Gideon, verse 19, went to his house, prepared a young goat and unleavened cakes from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, the broth in a pot, brought them to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened cakes and put them on the rock and pour the broth over them. And so he did. Then the angel of the Lord reached out with the tip of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened cakes, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened cakes. And the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. What connection could we possibly make here with the Lord and this activity that he just engaged with, this sacrifice? Fire sprang up. What does that usually indicate? Excuse me? That's right, God's presence, God's power. Often, very often. Remember the burning bush? The angel of the Lord vanished from him. Gideon perceived that it was the angel of the Lord, and he said, alas, O Lord my God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace be to you. Do not fear, you shall not die. Then Gideon built an altar there and to the Lord and called it, the Lord is peace. To this day it stands at Ophrah, which belongs to the Abiezrites. That night, verse 25, that night the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and a second bull 7 years old and pull down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of the stronghold here, with stones laid in due order. Then take the second bull, offer it as a burnt offering, with the wood of the Asherah that you've cut down. So Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was too afraid of his family and the men of the town to do it by day, he did it by night, under the cover of darkness. So he has his fears. Joash now is questioned the next morning. The men rose early, and they found the altar of Baal broken down, and the Asherah beside it cut down, and a second bull was offered on the altar that had been built. And they said to one another, who has done this thing? After they searched and inquired, they said, Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing. The men of the town and said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die. For he has broken down the altar of Baal and cut down the Asherah beside it. So anything related to Baal and the worship of Baal, Gideon has destroyed. Joash's response is, will you contend for Baal? Will you save him? Whoever contends for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is God, let him contend for himself, because his altar has been broken down. Therefore, on that day, Gideon was called Jerubbaal. That is to say, let Baal plead or contend against him, because he broke down his altar. Isn't it interesting that he throws this argument to them? Here's a lifeless object that they call a god. He can't do anything, and yet they're devoted to him. So let Baal contend for himself. Let Baal take his revenge if there's a problem. Interesting response, isn't it? Now in verse 33, now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east came together, and they crossed the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon, and he sounded the trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called out to follow him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and they too were called out to follow him. He sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, and they went out to meet him. So he's doing all these things, and yet look what happens now in verse 36 beginning. Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I will know that you have saved Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. Why do you think Gideon is asking these questions? Why is he asking for more evidence? Leave that with you. We'll read the next part. When he rose early the next morning, squeezed the fleece, he wrung out dew from the fleece to fill a bowl of water. Then Gideon said to God, let your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just one more with the fleece. Please let the fleece, or let it be dry, and on the fleece only, and all the ground be wet with dew. God did so, and it was dry on the fleece only. On the ground was dew. Why is he asking these questions? Lack of faith. Now, you know, we've looked at Thomas. We've called him Doubting Thomas. I think that's a cruel way to talk about a man. Compare him to what Gideon is doing here. Think about that. Just one more piece of evidence, and Thomas was convinced. Here, Gideon. Just a little bit more evidence, and he's convinced. We could call him Doubting Gideon. I think it's cruel. It might not take nearly as much evidence for you to believe in God than it does for me, and vice versa. But the Lord is always ready and willing to give us whatever we need to love Him and trust Him. And I think that's a wonderful lesson here for us. Chapter 7. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the spring of Harod. And the camp of Midian was on the north of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. So Gideon is ready. His army is ready. But Jehovah is not. Verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, the people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me and say, my hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and trembling, let him return home. Hurry away from Mount Gilead. 22,000 returned only 10,000 were left. Quite an army he had collected together in short order, but just very quickly, he loses over half of them because they're fearful. I think there's a lesson in that too. Back to the point Mark made. If we have faith in God, there's no reason to be fearful. And it seems that these men didn't have any faith in God, nor apparently even in Gideon. Verse 4. The people are still too many, the Lord said. Take them down to the water, and I will test them there for you. Anyone of whom I say, this one shall go with you, shall go with you. Anyone who says, whom I say, he shall not, this shall not go with you. So he brought the people to the water. And I'm sorry. Too many things to get my hands messed up. So now they're at the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps water with his tongue, as a dog laps, you shall set by himself. Likewise, everyone who kneels down to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hands to their mouths, was 300, and all the rest of the people knelt down to drink water. So those who had knelt down were 9,700 people out of the 10,000 remaining. 300 drank from their hands. What's the difference?
You only have 300 beside God as the leader.
That is true.
The people are not going to say we did it through our own.
That is true. But what is the difference between them kneeling down and drinking from their hands? I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. Good. I think that's a definite factor in this. It takes time, a lot of time for me to kneel down anymore, but it takes time to kneel down and drink. And as she just pointed out, you can't see what's going on while you're down on your knees looking at the water, but you can reach down and grab some water and drink out of your hands and still watch what's going on. You can still be alert. And those seem to be the men that were brave, and the 300 that God is going to use to save Israel. That's what he says in verse 7. With 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands, and let all the others go every man to his home. So the people took provisions in their hands and their trumpets, and they sent all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, but retained 300 men, and the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Now, Jehovah gives even more evidence. Without even asking this time, do you believe me? Are you ready to follow me? He gives even more evidence to Gideon. Notice what he says. That same night the Lord said to him, arise and go down against the camp, for I will give it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant, and you shall hear what they say. And afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down to the camp. Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outposts of the armed men who were at the camp. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance. And their camels were without number, as the sand on the seashore in abundance. When Gideon came, behold, a man was telling a dream to his comrade. And he said, behold, I dreamed a dream. And behold, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came to the tent, and struck it so that it fell down, turned upside down. So the tent lay flat. And his comrade said, "This is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel." And his statement is, God has given into his hand, Midian, all the camp. These people knew what was going on. And I'm sure the Lord was working through them too. But here's a great man of faith given more evidence. Verse 19, so Gideon and 100 men who were with him came to the outskirts of the camp of beginning and middle watch, and they set up a watch. And they blew trumpets and smashed jars that were in their hands. Then the three companies blew their trumpets and broke jars, and held in their left hands the torches, and in their right hands the trumpets to blow. And they cried out, "A sword of the Lord, and for Gideon." Can you imagine going into battle with torches? What are you going to do? No weapons. What do you think the empty jars suggest? The broken jars. What do you think that might suggest for them as well as for us? I'll let you think about that while we go on here. Gideon and the 100 men, they break their jars, and then the 300 break their jars, and they yell, "The sword of the Lord and Gideon." Every man, verse 21, every man stood in his place around the camp, and all the army ran. They fled out, or they cried out and fled. They blew 300 trumpets. The Lord set every man's sword against his comrade and against all the army. And the army fled as far as Bethsheba, towards Zerah, and as far as the border of Abimelech and Tabith. And the men of Israel were called out from Naphtali and from Asher and from all Manasseh, and they pursued after Midian. All we have today is what in our battle? The sword, God's word, and his spirit. His spirit. Didn't they have the same thing here? They had identically the same thing. They had God's word and they had God's spirit. These 300 men apparently had no fear, and God did the rest. I'm just impressed with the statement, every man stood in his place. He posted them 3 places around the city, or around this valley. And you can just imagine being in that valley and seeing from 3 vantage points all these torches lit up and these trumpets blowing.
And breaking those pictures.
Okay, now what?
What kind of sound would that make in the night?
That's a good point.
See, that's the point. The light, the pictures breaking. Who fights a battle?
That's right.
No man's going to be able to take credit for it.
That's right.
Only Jehovah.
That's right.
Jehovah has a reputation amongst the Mennonites, Amorites, all of them. They heard about Jehovah's power.
They did.
Left Egypt.
They did.
Hadn't forgotten it.
Yep. So what do you think the breaking of the pitchers means? I don't want to get too bogged down here, but what do you think it might mean? Any idea?
God's weapons are different than man's weapons.
They are.
Give the illusion of 100,000 swords clearing their scabbard at the same time.
They turned against each other, didn't they? Yep. And that's the Lord's doing. That's the Lord's doing. But here, when we apply that spiritually today, am I willing for my picture to be broken? Inside is my light. Am I willing for my picture to be broken? And if we break it, we're gone. But am I willing to sacrifice that much? And these men were. That's all they had. That is all they had, except the Spirit of God with them. Verse 24. Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and capture the waters against them, as far as Bethera, and also the Jordan." So all the men of Ephraim were called out, and they captured the waters as far as Bethbara, and also the Jordan. They captured the two princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed by the winepress in Zeb. Then they pursued Midian, and they brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon across the Jordan. So what does it mean that they captured the waters, do you think?
Water is violent, and if you capture the land around the water, you have control.
That's right. But think about where these people are from. These people who are fighting against the Israelites are from where? The east. Across the Jordan River. Way across, over. And so if they're on the west side. If they capture and control the waters, they can't go back across. And that's, I believe, what was going on here. They're doing their job to capture those waters and control who is going to be crossing. That's a fearless job that they have to do. And so our bodies need to be a living sacrifice to the Lord also. Chapter 8. Gideon defeats Ziba and Zalmunna. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this that you have done to us, not to call us to fight against Midian?" And they accused him fiercely, and he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the grape harvest of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What have I done in comparison with you?" Then their anger was kindled. So he very humbly, as a leader, he shows this humility that a man should if he's going to be a leader like Gideon was. He's not self-seeking. He's not looking for any praise to himself. But he said, "Look what you've done. I didn't do anything that great." So they're appeased. Gideon came to the Jordan and crossed over, and he and his 300 men with him, exhausted and yet pursuing. And they went to the men of Succoth. "Please give us loaves of bread for my men to follow, because they're exhausted. And I'm pursuing Ziba and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." And the officials of Succoth said, Are the hands of Ziba and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give you bread?" So Gideon said, "Well then, when the Lord has given Ziba and Zalmunna in my hand, I will flail your flesh with thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Sounds pretty rough, doesn't it? And from there he went to Penuel and spoke to them the same way. And the men of Penuel had a similar answer. And he says, "When I come back in peace, I will break down this tower." This is typical of armies in those days, so we shouldn't be very appalled by that. Now Ziba and Zalmunna were in Karhor with the army. 15,000 people were still left. They'd already lost 120,000 men who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the way of the tent dwellers east of Nobah and Jochbah and attacked the army, and the army felt secure. for the army felt secure. And Ziba and Zalmunna fled and pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Ziba and Zalmunna, and it threw all the army into panic. Gideon, the son of Joash, returned for the battle by the ascent of Heres, and captured a young man of Succoth and questioned him. And this man gave him 70 men, the names of elders in Succoth. And he came to Succoth, and he said, Behold, Ziba and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Ziba and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are exhausted? And he took the elders, look at this, he took the elders of the city, and he took thorns from the wilderness and briars, and with them taught the men of Succoth a lesson. What do you suppose is going on? This is again warfare of the day. You know how briars are. They're torturous. But he took those briars, the bushes, and he literally beat these men, made them lie down prostrate, and beat these men, scratched their bodies severely. And he broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Then he said to Ziba and Zalmunna, Where are the men you killed at Tabor? They answered and said, So they were. As you are, so were they. Every one of them resembled the son of the king. And Gideon said, They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you. But who is Gideon at this point? Go back to the law. Who is Gideon at this point? The avenger of blood. His brothers have been killed. He's the avenger of blood. And so he speaks to his son, his firstborn, and he says, Rise and kill them. The young man did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a young man. So Ziba and Zalmunna taunt him a little bit. Rise yourself and fall upon us, for a man so is his strength. Gideon rose and killed Ziba and Zalmunna, and he took the crescent ornaments that were on the necks of their camels. So the men of Israel said to Gideon, Rule over us, and your son and your grandson, for you have saved us from the hand of Midian. Gideon says, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And Gideon said to them, Let me make a request of you. Every one of you give me the earrings from your spoil. For they had gold earrings because of the Ishmaelites. And they answered, We will willingly give them. And they spread a cloak. Every man threw his earrings in the spoil. And the weight of the earrings that was requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. Now, listen to that. That's just the earrings or rings of whatever kind they were. But now, he says, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, besides the collars that were around the necks of the camels. These people had wealth, unbelievable. And they would display it. They would hang it on the necks of their camels. They would hang it on their own necks, hang it on their foreheads, off their ears, out of their nose. Just gold, unbelievable. And this, even the pendants and the purple garments. Now, Gideon has a problem. This is a very expensive ephod that he makes. Gideon made an ephod, and he put it in the city of Ophrah, and all Israel whored after it, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. So Midian was subdued in the days of Israel. They raised their heads no more, and the land had rest for 40 days. There's the 40 days again. I don't know. There's been a lot of speculation as to what this ornament was. It may have been just a simple trophy or an ornament of his success, victories. I don't know. It may have been an ephod, as the scriptures call it, that he just hung up as a plaque. It may have been something that he wore or a priest of his wore. But remember, Gideon had been asked to make a sacrifice to the Lord. So this is unusual. Usually it's a priest that does this. But Gideon was asked to do that for the Lord, and he did. Anyway, verse 29. Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his house. And now Gideon had 70 sons, his own offspring, and had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died in a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash, his father, in Ophrah, in the Abiezrites. What kind of a man was Gideon? In your estimation, what kind of a man was he? Well, let me take it a step further. In God's estimation, what kind of a man was he?
Useful.
Useful for sure. What's the book of Hebrews say about Gideon? Space fails me to mention all the people of faith. And Gideon was one of those men whose name is in the Hall of Fame, Hall of Faith.
In verse 33, it says that when Gideon died, the people turned again across the Jordan. It says something about Gideon that he kept him.
I'm sure I'm not understanding. I'm sorry.
When Gideon died, the people turned back.
Yeah, they did.
But it says something about Gideon's leadership, that while he was the leader, they seem to have done better. Well, we have that cycle on both the judges.
Well, let me counter you with this. When Jesus came to the end of his ministry, what did his followers do? I'm sorry? Deserted him. Lost their hope. Lost their faith. And Jesus, you couldn't have had a better leader. I understand your point, and that's true, because that's the cycle that we see in the book of Judges. No question about that. I don't think it speaks ill of Gideon's leadership. It speaks ill of the hearts of Israel. My opinion. Gideon was a man of faith. He was a good leader, and he was appreciated by the Lord. Verse 33, soon as Gideon died, she's right. They all turned back to their gods. Chapter 9. Boy, we're just about out of time. I don't know where the time went. But Abimelech now makes a serious mistake. He is the son of Gideon, and he becomes king at his request, obviously. But look real quickly with me to verse 8 of chapter 9. The trees this is his brother, the youngest brother who escaped and was not killed. And he tells this parable. The olive tree was asked to reign over them. The fig tree, the vine, and finally the bramble. And who reigned over the people? All three, the first three, denied. Why did they deny? I think this is a wonderful lesson. Why did these three, the olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine, deny? Why did they decline to be a king?
They were more useful doing
They had a purpose that God had given them. God had given them a purpose, and they were not going to forsake that purpose to be something else. That speaks very highly of where we ought to be. Our hearts ought to be in tune with the Lord, and if they're not, we're not serving His purpose. We're not pleasing Him. Thank you for your time.